Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today is going to be a little bit of a longer video. It's going to be a wrap-up video, and I haven't done a wrap-up in a very long time. I have 15 books I need to wrap up, and I am going to try not to talk about each book too much, especially the ones that I've already kind of talked about. But I really wanted to do this video before I get too many books. So we're going to talk about the last 15 books that I've read since my last wrap-up video, and hopefully you guys enjoy this. Again, I'm going to kind of speed through them a little bit more than usual, but I have a lot of interesting books that I read and some interesting thoughts on them, so hopefully you enjoy this. So grab some hot cocoa, grab a coffee, tea, a snack, whatever, and just sit back and enjoy this video. Okay, so the last book that I read since my last wrap-up video was My Husband by Maud Ventura, I think is how you pronounce her name. And this is a literary fiction novel, and I actually saw another YouTuber talk about this book, and she was saying it was so good and that it was just really interesting, and she had so many good things to say about it. She said it was one of her favorite books that she had read so far this year, and it just really interested me because she said, like, it's about a woman that's very obsessed with her husband, like just obsessed with him. I'm like, okay. She keeps saying it's fascinating, so I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it on audio. So I picked this book up, and let me just say, this book reminded me that I don't love literary fiction. I just don't love it. I can read it and I can like it for sure. Like, I've definitely loved certain literary novels, but it's not my favorite genre. It's just not my favorite genre, and I really struggle through a lot of literary books because I need my books to have a point. I need it to have a reason. I need to have a reason for reading my books, right? Like, I need to, like, the author has to have like an overarching lesson that you learn, or like a twist at the end, or whatever, but it has to have a point. And sometimes I find with literary fiction, it's more so just like following the character through some really interesting situation, and like there's kind of like a fun little ending, but like it's not really anything powerful. It's more about just reading about this character in this really crazy like situation, right? And that's exactly what this book was. So this is basically, like the girl said in the video, it's about this woman who's obsessed with her husband, and she's obsessed with like wanting him to love her and like trying to figure out like how to make him love her more and how to like test him and like, you know, all of those kinds of things. And it's just kind of like her story of trying to get her husband to love her more. And the ending does have like an interesting little twist, but it's so kind of underwhelming that you're asking yourself at the end, like, was that ending worth the entire first half of the story? Like, was it that interesting for us to have this entire book, you know? And I don't think it was. Like, I just didn't find myself like overly excited about it. I was just kind of like, really? Like, that's the ending? Like, it just didn't do anything for me, you know? This book just didn't have enough of a point. It didn't have enough of a purpose. And like I said, I just really need that in my books. So I had to give this book 2 stars. I'm not gonna lie, I've read quite a few 2-star books this year already, and I would say this year, out of any year, I've had more 2-star books. And I don't know if I'm just being more generous with them or I'm just rating things lower. I'm not really sure, but there was just a lot of not great books this year. The next book was The Mermaid's Voice Returns in this one, which is a poetry collection by Amanda Lovelace. I think I'm kind of done with Amanda Lovelace. She's not the worst in the world, but you know, it's just not my type of poetry. Like, I think I gave it 3 stars, but 3 stars for a poetry collection isn't something where I'm like, I definitely need to read the next one, you know what I mean? So Amanda Lovelace isn't my fave, but I did read that one. So the next book that I read was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. So this was my very first Stephen King novel, and I had no idea what to expect. I'd never read a Stephen King before, and I just didn't know if I was gonna like it or not. And as you guys know, I lost my beloved cat earlier this year, and this book just had almost this tie to her in this weird way, and I felt like it was a really good time to read it. I don't know why. I just felt like it was a good time to read it because I've heard, well, before I read this, I heard it had a lot of deeper messaging. It was kind of endearing, and so I kind of thought, like, you know, grief and pets and all that kind of thing, right? Well, it does have like pets and, you know, grieving of pets and things like that, but this is not what I was expecting as far as like plot. So I think when you don't know anything about Pet Sematary, you think it's going to be about a cemetery and it's where you bury your pets, and then maybe like the pets come to life and then they like murder everybody or something, right? Like, you kind of, that's what I thought it was going to be about. But it's definitely not necessarily about that fully. like a little bit, just a little bit, but not fully. And the interesting thing about this book, and the thing about Stephen King that I'm just kind of so on, is his writing style. And Stephen King is a very, very, very meandering author. He describes things to the point that, like, you're like, why are you describing this tricycle to me? Why are you describing this neighbor that is literally mentioned one time in the novel, her entire backstory? Like, I don't need to know the neighbor's backstory. That's how Stephen King writes. And in ways, it does make the story better. Like, I do feel like you get really, really, really attached to these characters and like their life, because you just know so much about them as characters, and the descriptions like really, really bring the story to life. But I have to be in a very specific mood to read writing like that. And I think it was a good time for me to read this one. Like, I was ready to just kind of sink my teeth into a really, really long, kind of like in-depth novel. And so it was a really good time for me to read this, but I couldn't read Stephen King at any time. So that's my only downfall for this book. And I think that's why I gave this book 4 stars instead of 5, was just that writing style that's kind of hard for me to get into at times. But the thing about this book that just kind of caught me off guard was the exploration of grief. Now, obviously, we talk a little bit about grieving pets in this, but we talk about also grieving sisters, grieving children, grieving parents, grieving wives. And it's kind of how different people cope with grief in different ways. And like, it was such an interesting take on grief. Like, I really, really, really liked that. And I love it when an author takes a subject and really picks it apart in their novel in a really, really unique way. Another book that comes to mind when I think about like this type of writing would be The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender. She talks a lot about love in like all of its different forms. So this is kind of a similar like written story, just for love, whereas this one is kind of exploring grief in all of its forms, if that makes sense. And I really, really, really liked that. I thought it was really well done, and it was so interesting seeing all the different characters grieving and like their stories and all of that kind of thing. So this book was definitely 4 stars. Would I say to read this maybe if you're in like a reading slump? Probably not. I wouldn't say Stephen King is the best like reading slump author, but if you're in the mood for one of those just like long stories that are a little bit more hard-hitting, I would definitely say give this one a try. If you guys have any recommendations on the next Stephen King I should read, let me know. I actually want to read more of his recent work to see if his writing style is similar to how his old writing style was, because this is definitely an older novel, and I'd be curious to see if he's as descriptive now as he was then, because it's very, very obvious that that's his writing style. Like, he describes everything. Okay, so the next book I read was Court of Night. This is the 3rd book in this little Court of Shadows, I think is what it's called, series. And okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this because I've talked about this series in a few videos of mine now and like TBRs and things like that, and this series is fun. I do really like C.N. Crawford's work. I like some of her series more than others. Now the thing about this one I'm really kind of disappointed in, I have one more book to read, they're short little novellas, is there is no spice in these books at all. And if you guys remember me talking a little bit about like the 1st and 2nd, I was like, oh, there's gonna be spice in this. Like, the main character's an incubus. Like, there's no reason why you'd put an incubus in your story if you're not gonna have like a little bit of spice in it, right? Like, it makes no sense. And these characters are kind of like enemies to lovers, and it's like, it's a very slow burn story. And I'm like, there's gonna be spice in this. Like, why wouldn't there be? Well, there is not. There is no spice. And there's, in this book, the thing that bothered me so much about this one, it's the 3rd one, they finally kind of come together and realize their love for each other. And they finally like hook up, like fully, but it is completely fade to black. Like, the most fade to black I think I've ever read. It's more fade to black than like an YA novel. And I'm like, wait a second, what is going on? Like, did they just like do it? Or did they not do it? I don't even know. Like that's how fade to black it was, and like you got nothing about how it was like the emotional impact of it. You didn't see how it like affected the characters or their relationship. Like, it took so much away from this relationship. I literally did not care. I was so confused by it because I'm like, all that build up for that's what I get. It was so disappointing, I'm not gonna lie. I have one more book to read and I'm going to read it. I'm hoping that maybe the fade to black isn't quite as bad. Like, I'm not one of those people that needs like, you know, steamy scene after steamy scene after steamy scenes. Like, I don't need that. Like, in fact, I often find like spicy scenes when they're used too often to get redundant, and I actually kind of skim them, especially if they're not like helping the story along at all. But spicy scenes are sometimes really important in adult novels to help you understand the relationship better, help you see the relationship grow and mature and like see their connection, and this book needed it. This book really, really, really needed it, and it was really disappointing. It was a poor choice by the authors, if I'm being honest, and they probably should have done it a little bit differently, I think. So again, they didn't need like 500 steamy scenes, but just one would have been fine, or at least a little bit. Like, you don't have to be like super vulgar or anything, but just give me something, you know? Okay, so then I went to a little soccer tournament. We had to go and stay the night in a hotel, and it was actually really, really fun, but I was looking for like some quick, easy reads to read on this trip because I knew it was like a soccer tournament, and when you're doing like soccer tournaments or sports tournaments, you don't have a lot of time to like sit down and read for long periods of time. And I knew I didn't want to read a book like a fantasy where like you're just dipping in and dipping out and dipping in and dipping out. Like, I hate reading fantasy like that. It just is so hard to like get yourself into the world when you have to read just like really small amounts, you know, over and over again. So I decided to read more of the Improbable Meet-Cutes. And these are like short little novellas that were written by multiple different authors, and they were perfect to read at this soccer tournament because I could just jump into these books really quickly and then, you know, jump out and then jump back in. They were short and sweet and really fast paced because they are novellas. So if you're ever in a situation where you have a lot of downtime, but it's like really short spurts of downtime, you know what I mean? These are the perfect things to read in that type of situation. So the first one was With Any Luck. This one was by Ashley Poston. So this is about a girl who is best friends with this man who is getting married. So she's the best man in this wedding, and for her best friend who's a guy, and then the woman who's marrying the guy, she has a best friend who is a boy, and so he's like the maid of honor, but like the boy maid of honor. What would that be? Man of honor? And basically what happens is they go out for the bachelor and bachelorette parties, and the main character can't remember what happened at the bachelor party. She's like, I can't remember anything. I drank way too much. And the next day, like, the guy who's getting married, like, nobody can find him, and they're looking everywhere for him, and she thinks that maybe she accidentally kissed the groom, and she can't remember. And so her and the man of honor are looking for the groom in this book. And it's a romance, so it's like a very fast-paced romance. Now, one thing I've noticed with these books is some of them are really good, some of them are so-so. This one was so-so. This one should have been a little bit longer. This one was just, it was cute and it was fun. It was great for like the kind of situation I was reading it in, but it was a little bit too quick. Like, at the end, I was kind of like, okay, I just wanted a little bit more to this relationship. I just kind of felt like I wasn't invested fully in this couple. Like, it could have been a little bit better if it was a little bit longer. So this one was okay. I would definitely say read it if you get the chance. It's kind of fun, but it's definitely not my favorite out of all of the Meet-Cutes. The other one that I ended up reading was The Exception to the Rule. This one was by Christina Lauren. Now this one was really cute. This one the other one I gave 3 stars. This one I gave 4 stars. This one was about these two people who were in the same college class, and the guy messages the girl thinking that she is the professor. And they kind of start talking over email, and every single year on this exact day, on Valentine's Day, because it's kind of a joke where they like don't have anyone to spend Valentine's Day with, so they like are messaging each other on Valentine's Day. So the next year they message each other and they're like, Happy Valentine's Day, hopefully you have somebody to spend it with this year. And then the next year they email each other again like, oh, Happy Valentine's Day. It's kind of like a running joke where on Valentine's Day they message each other every single year. This one is really cute because it's like this slow burn. You can kind of see their relationship develop over the years. This one was really, really cute. I really liked this one. This is probably one of my favorite out of the Meet-Cutes. I think I've read 4 of the Meet-Cutes so far. This one and the one by Abby Jimenez were definitely my 2 favorites. But yeah, I really, really like this one. So if you want to start with one that you know you're gonna like, I would definitely recommend this one because it was very, very cute. Okay, so this next book is a book that I've been waiting to talk about because I freaking loved this book. This is a 5-star read for me, and I will tell you something. I have never given a poetry collection 5 stars, ever. Like, I never love poetry collections that I read, But the thing about it is that I like poetry. I like writing it sometimes, and like I enjoy poetry, but I just could never find the author that wrote the kind of poetry that I was looking for. Like I knew what I wanted, but I just couldn't find it in an author. Well, I found it. I found it. And so I used to follow this girl way, way, way back in the day, and I remember I used to think she was just gorgeous. Like this girl is one of the prettiest girls I've ever seen. I'm gonna show you her. Look at her. Is she not so gorgeous? I can't even handle it. I used to follow her on YouTube. She used to make other types of videos, and I kind of just kept following her. Like I never unfollowed her or anything like that. She kind of stopped making YouTube videos, but every once in a while she'd post her writing or she would post her poetry, and I'm always like, I really like that. Or that's a really pretty poem. And so finally I was like, you know what? I think she has a poetry collection. I'm just gonna buy it because I tend to like the way that she writes. So this is called The Observer's Atlas, and it's by McKenna Suman. This poetry collection was so good. So I have mentioned before that I hate romantic poetry, which is weird because I'm a major romance reader. I love romance movies, I love romance anything. Like I am the most like romance lover that you can find. I've been that way my whole life. But for some reason I find romantic poetry and poetry about love, about relationships and stuff like that to be so boring. And I think it's because they're so cliche. They're the same freaking thing over and over and over and over again. You know what I mean? Like I just find them to be so boring. And I always think to myself, there's so many other things to write about, right? Like I want poetry about random things, like random things, just funny little paradoxes or weird things that happen to you, or like interesting ideas that the author has, like different ways of looking at things, you know what I mean? I just want unique poetry and I can't find it. This is it. I am telling you guys, if you are looking for a poetry collection and you can't find one that you love, get this one. So I tabbed this book so flippin' much, I don't know if you can see, and I posted a few of them on my Instagram, and I'm gonna read one to you that I loved. Okay, this was one of my favorite poems. Let me see if I can find it. And I did post this one on my Instagram, so you guys may have seen it, but this poem is just a taste of what this poetry is like, okay? So she wrote a poem for every single month of the year, and this one is February. I am all sighs now. I search the frozen earth for any semblance of a coming spring. Some sight of primrose reaching, but February whispers to my ear a gentle plea. I'm trying, with what I have and what I lack, to be something beautiful. I will be swift. I will not take up as much time as the others. I will leave the slumbering creatures a little more sleep. Please don't think too poorly of me. I love that poem. It's so precious because like who likes February? Nobody. February is the worst month by far. It's like winter, but like you don't have Christmas to look forward to anymore. It's like that last really, really cold month where you're just like, I am so sick of this stupid weather. It's the annoying month that just keeps pushing winter along and you're just over it. And it was kind of like February begging you to not judge it. Like it's trying its best with what it's lacking. And it's just such a great poem. And that's just a taste. Like there are so many amazing poems in here that I marked. Like I could read so many poems that I absolutely loved. So if you're looking for a good poetry collection, please read this one. It is about the most interesting things, like different ideas, different topics that you haven't read poetry about before. And it's very like beautifully written, but very tangible. Like you still know what she's trying to say. Like it's not over the top where you're just like, what the frick are you trying to say? Like I hate poetry that's too vague. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to be so poetic that you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like I don't like poetry like that. But this is the perfect mix of like, you know, knowing what she's talking about, being able to like relate a little bit, but it's also still very, very beautiful at the same time. Like this poetry is just fantastic. Highly recommend. I will be reading this again in the future for sure. So, okay, so the next book was another 2-star read. I really did not like this one. So I read like 3 2-star reads in a row. I think I had one book in between that kind of broke things up, but I think it was like a 3-star. But I was having really bad reading luck there for a little bit, and this was the first 2-star out of that string of 2 stars, and it was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. So I saw one girl talk about this and she goes, oh, this book like interested me the whole time. I read it via audio and I just thought it was so fascinating. And the thing about it is I like sci-fi and I really, really love a good thought-provoking sci-fi that just keeps me entertained. But I just don't read sci-fi very often, even though I really, really like it. And so she said it was a pretty short book, but she really liked it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get this on audio and I'm gonna listen to it. I did not like this book at all. So this is definitely for those people who like settings. This book is very much about the setting that this book takes place in. So it's about these 4 women that get sent to this weird land, this weird world. And it's kind of like this really, really, really surreal place. And they're trying to study it because they're trying to figure out, like, what is this place? Like, what is wrong with this place? Like, the other people that have come to study this place have all died or whatever. It's just a weird place. And so they're trying to learn about this place. I can't remember what it's called. I don't know, it doesn't matter. So she goes with these other 4 girls, and it's just kind of like their study of this place that they are in, and then things happen to some of the people there, and like weird things start happening, and like it's the main character kind of like talking about what being there was like, but it's so surreal and just so, there's like no answers. You get really no clear understanding of anything. It's all very just like surreal is the best word I can come up with to use for this book. What's another word for surreal? Phantasmagorical. This book is very phantasmagorical. I think what I didn't like about this book is it kind of had the same issues that The Husbands had, where it didn't really have like that really, really clear point and purpose. Really, really, really vague. It was really, really, really bizarre. And it just kind of like fizzled out near the end, and it just doesn't give you anything. It kind of reminds me of like how Alice in Wonderland feels just a little bit, where it's like really, really, really bizarre and really just out there, and you're just kind of reading it, like reading along with it, but you're just kind of start getting a little tired by the end of the nonsense and just bizarreness of it. That's kind of how this book felt. So I'm not going to continue. It's a series, and the books are pretty small. I'm not going to continue. I didn't find it enjoyable at all. I found it incredibly boring. It's like a very split book, and it has to be your taste. You know what I mean? Like, if you like this specific type of book, then you will love it. But there's a reason why people don't love it, you know? It's that type of book. Okay, so the next book is The Last True Poets of the Sea, and you guys may remember me picking this for a TBR video. And I read this and was very disappointed. This was also part of the 2-star string of books that I had. And I, as I mentioned, was looking forward to this book. Like, I had heard so many good things when I got this book, and this is an arc. Like, I don't remember getting this arc. Where did I get this? I have no idea. But yeah, I heard such great things about this book, and I was thinking it was going to be really, really good. But this book was not. I gave it 2 stars, as we said. So this is about a girl who is like kind of a troublemaker. She's going through a really hard time. Her brother is going through a really, really, really hard time, and their parents are focusing, or her parents are focusing a lot of their attention on her brother. And so they decide to send her daughter off to this seaside town that her great-great-grandmother founded. So basically her great-grandmother, she was on a ship, the ship sunk, and her great-great-grandmother survived it. She was like the only survivor. She swam to shore and discovered this tiny little small town. And so she's kind of like in the lineage of this town, and so she goes to like learn more about it. She starts working at the like aquarium and all this stuff, and this book was boring. Oh my god, it was so boring. So it just is very, it's a sapphic romance, and it's just not done very well, I don't think. It has like the manic pixie dream girl character. It has like, it's just boring. Like, I was waiting for this ship like aspect, right? It talks about a ship, and like she goes off with this girl to like learn about this sunken ship, and they want to like discover it and find it, and like it feels like it's going to be like this adventure of like looking for this sunken ship. I thought it was going to be very beachy and all this stuff, but like the ship is like not a big part of this book. It finally happens at the end where they like, you know, go out to try to find this ship, and it's just, most of this book is boring. I would say I finally found interest in it maybe around like here. That's like literally 10% of the book left. It's supposed to be kind of like a family drama, and like the connection between your family and your mom and dad and brother, and then like her discovering her, you know, sexuality, and boring. boring, 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 2 stars, didn't like it, and the characters were just cliche. Like, this is definitely one of those really cliche, very stereotypical manic pixie dream girl story where you're just like, okay, there's this character, and there's this character, and there's this character, and then they're doing But I should have DNF'd this when I thought about it. I just didn't. You know, when you just decide not to, you decide to stick it through, thinking it's gonna get better, and then it just doesn't. Oh my gosh, so this next book, I was not expecting to like this book like I did. So you know how sometimes you just come across these certain books that you know are going to like brand themselves onto your brain. You don't know why it does it, but it's like the setting is a setting that's really unique, and so like you haven't read a book in that type of setting before, and so that setting will always be branded to your brain. Like, you will be 60 years old and you'll still be able to picture a book that you read in your 30s. That's how this book was. So this is Love Naturally, and it's about this girl who is planning this big, like, you know, trip for her and her boyfriend, and she wants to show her boyfriend how much she loves him, so she plans this big trip that's very focused around his interests. And right before they leave on the trip, he dumps her. And she's like, well, great, like, I don't want to go on this trip, like, I don't like fishing and hiking and all that stuff, but she decides to go anyways. Like, it's all paid for, and she's like, you know what, I need a vacation, I'm just gonna go. So she goes to this rundown resort on this little island, and she meets like this guy and his family who runs this, you know, lodge, and they're trying to keep it afloat. Now, the main character is actually a concierge, and she's really into like hotel services. Like, what is that called? I don't know, like hotel stuff. Like, she's really, really into that. And so she just happens to be a concierge and like all this stuff. She works at a hotel. So she kind of comes here and meets this guy, and she's like kind of helping him with ideas on how to make this lodge better. And she kind of like gets sucked into this like family dynamic, and she makes all these really close friends at this like cabin, but they're kind of unique friends. Like, there's an older guy, and it's just such a like cute little setting. I can't explain it. And it was so like cozy. Like, this is the most cozy little romance. And the way that I felt about these characters at the end of this romance was like how you feel about like A Court of Thorns and Roses. How I could literally picture every single character, every single place that is mentioned in this book. Like, I could map it out in my head. Like, this is where this is where this is, and this is where that girl works, and this is that little grocery store, and then this is where this guy works, and this is like, everything is so mapped out and clear in my head. Every character is so like fleshed out, and like you can picture everybody, and you just feel like you have been here. You know what I mean? These characters feel so close to me now. And I'm like, this is just a silly little romance. Like, how did this romance make such an impact on me in that type of way? I don't know. Sometimes books just do that. This book was like that. Like, if you want one of those romances that is just gonna suck you right into the world and the characters, and you want to feel everything, this is going to be the book for you. It wasn't a 5-star read. I gave this book like a 4, 4.5. There were some aspects of this book where I was kind of like, that's a little corny. Or this would not happen. Like, this is kind of a sketchy situation. Like, they would never let this situation happen. Like, there's aspects of it where I'm like, okay, I'll suspend my disbelief, right? And there was also a lot about this book that lacked conflict, lacked plot. It was very kind of just like her at this lodge, kind of helping them keep it afloat. So it kind of did lack a little bit of like an overarching like story arc, if that makes sense. It was more like this, and then it was kind of like this, and then like this again. So we had a big chunk in the middle of it. It was just kind of like them getting to know each other, but for some reason it worked. Like, I was so into this freaking couple, and I don't know. The only thing that I wish this book had was a little bit of steam. It is not a steamy read. It doesn't have any steam in it, so just know that going in. I think that this book could have benefited a lot from maybe one scene, just one. Like I said, it doesn't have to be overly like raunchy or anything, but just like one scene of them together, I think it could have made a big difference for them as a couple, for the reader. But that's just my personal preference. But yeah, this was really, really great. Highly recommend, especially if you don't like steamy romances. You will really, really like this one because it is just so flippin' endearing and cute, and you just love this couple by the end. So the next book I read was my next 2-star in my 2-star string of books. This was Love at First Psych by Cara Bastone. This was an audiobook that I read, and I was really excited for this. It's about a girl and a guy that get paired together in a college course, and they have to write a paper kind of like a thesis together about love at first sight. Do they believe in it? Do they not believe in it? And they have to basically interview a whole bunch of couples about how they met and, you know, when they fell in love and all this kind of thing. So they're kind of stuck together, but they have a past, and it's not a good past. It's kind of like, you know, academic rivals type of situation, but you don't know why. You don't know what happened between them until the very, very end. And as cute and endearing and kind of creative as the story was, it wasn't that great. Like, I was just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, it's a lot of interviewing like these random couples that we don't really care about, that we don't really know. And it's just hearing their story, but you're like, okay, how is this like helping this couple along? Like, what does this story about this random couple have to do with the overall storyline? Nothing, you know what I mean? So in that regard, I didn't really love it, and it was so corny. And this book you can only listen to on audio. There's no physical version of it. And if there was like a physical copy of it, I probably wouldn't have given it 2 stars, because I bet you this book would be better if you read it. But the actors and the audiobook readers were so over the top that this book felt so flippin' corny. The dialogue was too much. It was too much overacting, and it was just really, really corny dialogue, and it made me really cringe like through most of this book, to be honest. So because you can only listen to it on audio, and because the audiobook actors just made me cringe, I just can't recommend it. It was fine, but I wouldn't recommend it probably to anybody. I've read Carabastone in the past and I really liked it, but this particular one, it just was not my cup of tea. So again, I read Hyperbole and a Half. Highly recommend this. I repurchased this because I wanted to reread it so badly, and I will be rereading this again in the future. It is that funny. Very, very old school internet. Like, this is so nostalgic, but it has that same humor that just hits every time. Highly recommend. I just talked about this in a video, so I'm not going to go on and on about it, but I gave this 5 stars. The first time I read it, I gave it 4 stars, and then I read it again. I'm like, why did I give this 4 stars? Like, this is so funny. And then I upped it to 5 stars, so that one will never disappoint. Okay, so the next book I read was an audiobook, and this one was one that I had heard a little bit about, and I was really curious about it, and it's called Bad Therapy. What's the full title? Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And I'd heard just a little bit about this book, and I was actually really curious about it, and I wanted to go into this book completely open-minded and critical, because I think when you go into nonfiction, you have to go into it kind of with a critical eye and with a critical lens, but at the same time, I wanted to go into it with an open mind. So basically what this book is about how we are overly treating children through therapy, and how therapy can be extremely helpful, but therapy can also be unhelpful, or it can be really, really, really helpful until it's not. And sometimes it kind of talks about some of the problems with therapy, some of the problems with therapy with kids, and it also kind of talks about feelings and how, as humans, it's not normal for us to focus so heavily on our feelings, and how in society these days it's always about feelings, like how do you feel, and to validate feelings, and like what you feel isn't always like important to the situation, right? Like, we don't always have to talk and think so heavily about how we feel, because our feelings can be flawed, and our feelings can also not be helpful sometimes. And I think that sometimes, especially in society now, we focus so heavily on feelings, and it's something that is and can be a little bit detrimental to mental health. But one thing I actually found interesting was, you know, this is about kids mostly, but what I thought was interesting about this book is it kind of talks about therapy. Now, I've always been a huge advocate of therapy. Therapy has worked for me, 100%. But I've also had therapists that I don't like. And I was always kind of thinking, like, why did this therapist not work for me? And why did this therapist work for me? Like, this book really helped me kind of dive into my own experiences with therapy. And I think that anybody that is in therapy should read this book. You don't have to be a kid, you don't have to have kids, but I think it would be interesting for you to read for yourself, just so you can go into therapy with a bit more of a critical eye, to know that you're speaking to another human being, and, you know, knowing if the therapy is working. And it kind of helped me just kind of look back at my own experiences with therapy, and like why some therapists were great and why some weren't, and if I were to go into therapy again, like what I would look for. Did I take everything that she said as like truth, or did I agree with everything that she said? No. I think that at times this book is told through a very specific lens, right? Like a very privileged lens. And I think that this is much more nuanced than she was kind of letting off at times. I'm like, you know, I don't think that it's this black and white. And she did come across as a little black and white at times. But I appreciate her trying to bring up ideas that you as an individual can chew on and think about, right? Which is hard to do. Like, it's hard to do hard topics perfectly, I think, sometimes. Do I think she, like, missed the ball a few times? Yes, I do. But she still had some really good ideas that I will take and continue to chew on, if that makes sense. And she does mention that therapy can be great. She doesn't, like, completely disregard therapy as, like, this horrible thing. So I think that's important to remember too. Like, she's not trying to say that therapy is not helpful. She's saying, no, it is, but it's just not always helpful. You don't always have to go that route. And sometimes it can do more harm than good. I thought it was really interesting. This was a really, really, really interesting read, and it kind of made me kind of just look at my own life and like how focusing on my feelings isn't always the best idea. Anyways, so the next book was The Girls by Emma Cline. So I have a whole video about this. I'm not going to talk about it anymore really because I talked about it a ton in my last video. This was a really, really well written novel. Highly recommend it. I gave this book 4 stars because of just the impeccable writing style. Was the story perfect? No, but I would highly recommend this if you like really, really, really well written books. And books written kind of in the 1960s. It's about cults, and it was definitely an interesting read. It's definitely more on the literary side, but it definitely has more of like a purpose than some literary fiction does, and I thought this was really good. I was gonna give it about a 3.5, but I pushed it up to a 4 at the very end because the ending definitely rounded everything out and definitely gave it like a really, really good overall story arc. So 4 stars, loved this, thought it was great, and great for people that want to read a book with really great writing in it. So that is it, you guys. That was a lot of books to go through. Hopefully I can edit this down so it's not too long, but that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you were going to read any of these books, and let me know what your favorite book that you read recently was. I'd be very curious. And also, I have not mentioned this in a book video yet. I don't know why, I just keep forgetting, I think, but I made a Bookstagram account ages ago, and I've posted to it a couple of times, but there's like no followers on it because I never talk about it. But I created a Bookstagram that I could put more of my book content on, and I will link it down below, so if you guys want to follow me on that Instagram, you can, but it's going to be where more of like my book Instagram content is instead of like my main Instagram, if that makes sense. So definitely give that a follow. I think it's called carahamelief reads. Is that what it is? I don't know. It's something like that. But anyways, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.